Ukraine is on the winning end of this equation. Russia is in turmoil from the political leadership, the military leadership at the senior echelons. Don't know who to trust. I think they have this thorn in their side with thousands of paramilitary troops that can't just dismiss out of hand. So some force structure is going to be allocated to figuring out how to manage these thousands of troops. They are not going to be put into the fight and trusted to do their jobs. And then all the various kind of chain of command issues. Who's in charge? Can those assets be employed against Ukraine? Ukraine is going to have an enormous opportunity to strike out and liberate territory, with Russia less well positioned to employ, especially national assets.
Ну кто вы такой, чтобы со мной на ты разговаривать? А? Никто не разговаривал. Я говорю, не надо обобщать. Под контролем военные объекты Ростова, в том числе аэродром, самолеты, которые...
But it's the most dramatic military political confrontation in Russia in the last 30 years, since the time of the collapse of the Soviet Union in the early 1990s.
Мы не дадим этому повториться. Защитим и наш народ, и нашу государственность от любых угроз.
I think Putin emerges from this significantly weakened. I think if you're a member of the Russian elite, or in fact a member of the Russian population, you're going to look at this and think, wow, a private army just drove on Moscow for most of the day. No one stopped them, and they're allowed to leave and no real consequences after the president went on TV and called what they were doing treason and made comparisons to 1917. If I'm an average Russian citizen, I'm thinking this guy who I thought was inevitable, there's no alternative to him, he's the strong man who brought Russia back from his knees. I'm thinking all of that doesn't look very convincing anymore. And it's not quite clear what happens to him. And of course, if you're Yevgeny Prigozhin, you need to get a new food taster and watch your back, because I would think a lot of people, including Putin, will be rather angry with what we saw here. And Putin often holds a grudge. He often wants to take revenge on those who he thinks stabbed him in the back, and that's exactly what he said this morning, was this is a stab in the back. So it's still too early to say how this is going to work out for Prigozhin. I would say a comeback is not out of the question. Him being dead, in a few weeks or months is also not out of the question, and many options in between. For Wagner, this looks like it might be the end. Those Wagner troops who did not participate in this uprising are going to be integrated into the Ministry of Defense. Apparently everyone else is being dismissed but not charged. Look, at least in terms of the war in Ukraine, that they're being absorbed by the Ministry of Defense, I suspect some of them will probably leave, and they will be losing some of their best trained, most battle-hardened forces, and forces who helped enforce discipline along the front lines. So it could weaken the Russian military effort somewhat, although not as much perhaps as if this had gotten completely out of control.
We have seen an effort by the Ministry of Defense, but also something that was backed by Putin, because Putin himself basically backed the Ministry of Defense in this. The idea was to subordinate Wagner troops. They would have to re-sign their contracts, and they would have to go under the Ministry of Defense. And for Prigozhin, that meant losing his main tool, losing the gun. You know how Mao Zedong had said that political power comes out of the barrel of the gun. And he was holding the gun. Now he was being required to surrender the gun, and he didn't want to do that. So I think that is what really caused the timing of this operation. But it's very clear that it was something that was being prepared over time.
Easiest and clearest conclusion, though, out of everything that we've witnessed, is that Ukraine is on the winning end of this equation. Russia is in turmoil from the political leadership, the military leadership at the senior echelons. Don't know who to trust. I think they have this thorn in their side with thousands of paramilitary troops that can't just dismiss out of hand. So some force structure is going to be allocated to figuring out how to manage these thousands of troops. They are not going to be put into the fight and trusted to do their jobs. And then all the various kind of chain of command issues. Who's in charge? Can those assets be employed against Ukraine? Ukraine is going to have an enormous opportunity to strike out and liberate territory, with Russia less well positioned to employ, especially national assets. All those planes coming in from Russian territory, those strike bombers and all those things potentially are going to be more distracted.
Сейчас.
Ребята, а вы это пресса? Да. А вы кто? Вы что снимаете?
Мы просто снимаем, мы не пишем. Мы сами только говорим.